They forced him to open his bag in front of everyone over a sandwich that wasn't even his. A boy, humiliated under fluorescent lights, while strangers watched and whispered. That moment, caught on a shaky phone video, exploded across the city, but what no one knew was that this was never just about one boy. It was about a homeless man who once built skyscrapers, a veteran the system left behind, a little girl whose voice cut through the noise, and even a dog the world had written off. This isn't just a story about shame, it's a story about how dignity fights to survive when the world tries to erase it. Chicago at night was an orchestra without a conductor. Up above, glass towers glowed like steel cathedrals, every window lit by the hum of late-night meetings and unfinished deals. Down on the streets, the October wind carried the smells of gasoline, cheap pizza from food trucks, and the dampness of bodies curled up on sidewalks. This city never hid its extremes. Wealth and ruin breathed side by side. Outside a sprawling Walmart supercenter, James Harris, a 60-year-old homeless man, sat hunched against a brick wall. His army surplus coat was blotched with stains, a map of another life. Next to him, his only companion Rex, a gray dog with weary fur but burning amber eyes, rested at his feet. The old silver tag on its collar was scratched to near nothing, but the faint letters K9 Unit still lingered. Passers-by rarely spared James a glance, but many paused at Rex, sensing instinctively that this dog once belonged to a world of discipline and power. The night was sharper than usual. James tugged his knit cap lower, while Rex lifted his head. Each time the sliding doors whooshed open, nostrils flaring at the waves of warm, flower-scented air that rolled out. Shoppers hurried past with their carts full, eyes fixed forward, too busy to notice the man and dog pressed against the wall. Not far from them, Michael O'Connor leaned against a lamppost, a crushed beer can in his fist. His Marine Corps jacket had faded almost to gray, seams fraying like the edges of a memory. His face looked carved in stone, but his blue eyes held something fragile, an abyss known to every veteran carrying PTSD. A group of teenagers snickered as they spotted his worn-out boots, but Michael didn't respond. He only tightened his grip until the aluminum dented inward. On a bench beneath the glow of a billboard, Aisha Johnson, a 10-year-old girl with dark skin and wide, steady eyes, hugged a bag of donated groceries to her chest. Her pink coat was 2 sizes too big, the sleeves swallowing her hands. Her mother worked nights at the hospital. Her father was just gone. So Aisha sat quietly, watching people stream in and out, each of them a moving lantern in the cold. Everyone had somewhere to be. Everyone except her. Inside Walmart, Ethan Miller, 17, was wrapping up his shift. His navy polo was faded, his plastic name tag chipped at the corner. He had worked here since summer, stacking shelves, bagging groceries, doing whatever paid minimum wage could do for his mother at home. Nobody here knew that Ethan's father was a state legislator. Ethan liked it that way. At Walmart, he wasn't a politician's son. He was just another kid punching the clock. He bent down to pick up a pack of soda cans when a wrapped sandwich slipped from a customer's basket and hit the floor, skidding to a stop. Ethan crouched instinctively, reaching for it, just as Mr. Collins, the night manager, appeared. Collins was in his 40s, thick around the middle but polished to the last detail, crisp white shirt, blood-red tie, shoes shining like courtroom floors. He was known for being strict, merciless even, especially with the young hires. The tap of his shoes on the tile was like a gavel. "Ethan," Collins said, his voice calm but loud enough for customers to turn their heads. "Hand me your bag, Ethan." "Froze, sir, my bag? The one you brought. Open it, now." For a moment the air tightened. Shoppers slowed, phones half raised, eyes glinting with curiosity. A mother with a stroller frowned but kept silent. Ethan felt the weight of every stare sink into him like stones. I didn't take anything," he said, clutching his canvas bag tighter. Inside was only his lunchbox, a few notebooks, a bus pass, and a handmade birthday card for his little sister. Collins crossed his arms, a smile tugging one corner of his mouth. If you didn't, then you've got nothing to hide. A customer saw you bend down for that sandwich. From somewhere behind, a woman whispered, "He looks like the type." The words spread quickly, feeding the quiet judgment in the air. A young man angled his phone higher, recording. Ethan's hand shook as he unzipped the bag. He pulled it open, revealing the contents. No sandwich. Just the worn-out pieces of his daily life. Collins barely glanced inside before offering a thin, polished smile. "Remember this, Ethan. Trust isn't given, it's earned. And you haven't earned it yet." The sentence landed heavier than a slap. Around them, customers nodded, some murmured, "Kids these days. Lazy and dishonest." Through the glass doors, James squinted from his corner, Rex rumbling low in his throat. Michael O'Connor straightened at the sound, his old instincts rising like ghosts. And little Aisha, hesitant but brave, stepped forward, pulling a broken cookie from her grocery bag to press into James's hand, then lifting her gaze toward Ethan, her eyes offering something warmer than pity, belief. None of them knew that a stranger's phone was still recording, the red dot blinking. By morning, this clip would ricochet across social media, igniting something far larger than a sandwich on the floor. That night in Chicago, the air grew heavier. Yet even in that silence, a fragile light remained, the unwavering look of a child who chose to trust a boy humiliated in front of the world. By the time Ethan stepped out into the night air, the chill of Chicago felt sharper, cutting through his thin jacket. The parking lot lights buzzed overhead, pale halos spread across the wet asphalt. He walked quickly toward the bus stop, clutching his canvas bag as if it could shield him from the eyes that had just pierced through him. Behind him, Walmart's sliding doors whispered open and shut, spilling light and chatter into the dark. Inside, Mr. Collins had already returned to his office, reviewing surveillance footage as though truth lived in grainy pixels. Out front, a different kind of camera had captured the story. The woman with the stroller had uploaded her clip before even leaving the store. 10 seconds long, shaky but clear enough. A boy in a faded polo, hands trembling as a manager rifled through his bag. Her caption was simple: "Humiliation isn't part of the job description. #respect young workers." By the time she reached her car, the post had 100 views. By the time she buckled her child into the seat, it had 1,000. And by the time Ethan sat down at the bus stop, staring at the puddle reflecting the Walmart sign, the number ticked past 10,000. James watched the boy walk past, his steps heavy, shoulders hunched against the world. The old man wanted to say something, "You don't owe them your shame," but the words stayed lodged in his throat. Instead, he gave Rex a soft pat. The dog whined, low and restless, as if it too sensed that something larger had begun. Michael O'Connor tossed the crushed can into a trash bin and followed Ethan with his eyes. He didn't know the kid, but the look on his face, half fury, half humiliation, pulled something raw from Michael's memory. It was the same look he had seen on young Marines when a superior dressed them down in front of the unit, stripping away dignity in the name of discipline. Some never recovered from that kind of wound. And Aisha, clutching her bag of donated food, turned her gaze between the boy and her phone. She didn't have service most of the time, but tonight the free Wi-Fi from the store reached the bench. She saw the video, the red comments pouring in. "This is disgusting. He's just a kid. Fire the manager. This is America. We still treat workers like thieves." Her fingers itched. She wanted to type something, anything, but at 10 years old, she had no words the internet would listen to. So she did the only thing she could, whispered a quiet prayer that the boy on the screen would know at least one person believed him. On the bus, Ethan stared at the floor. He could still hear Collins's voice in his ears. "Trust isn't given. It's earned." The words looped like a cruel chant. He didn't notice the man across the aisle scrolling on his phone, pausing at a familiar clip. Didn't notice the murmur start as another passenger leaned in, watching. By the third stop, half the bus was whispering about the Walmart kid. Ethan kept his head down. He didn't know his face was already everywhere. Meanwhile, in a downtown apartment far removed from cracked sidewalks and flickering streetlights, a different phone buzzed. Congressman Robert Miller rubbed his temples after a long day of speeches and policy briefings. He tapped open the notification, expecting some new headline about inflation. Instead, he saw his son, Ethan, cornered under the harsh fluorescent lights of Walmart, hands shaking as a manager ordered him to open his bag. For a moment, the congressman couldn't breathe. His son had insisted on working, said he wanted to earn his own money. Robert had agreed, proud even. But now the whole internet was watching Ethan's humiliation, and in politics, humiliation was contagious. He set the phone down, staring at the skyline through his window. Tomorrow morning, he would have to choose: defend his son publicly and risk political backlash, or stay silent and let the boy weather the storm alone. Either way, the city was already awake. Chicago's towers gleamed like watchful eyes, and down in the neighborhoods where streetlights buzzed and wind cut through thin jackets, people were beginning to talk. About Walmart. About dignity. About a kid with trembling hands and a manager who thought suspicion was the same as authority. Something small had cracked. And cracks, in a city like this, had a way of spreading. The video didn't stop at 10,000 views. By midnight, it had passed 50. By dawn, it would pass 1 million. For now, the city held its breath. Ethan's bus rattled through the south side, past rows of shuttered shops and graffiti-streaked walls. He sat with his bag hugged to his chest, wishing it could make him invisible. Every vibration in his pocket made him flinch. Texts from classmates, messages from numbers he didn't know, the flood of alerts he couldn't bring himself to open. When the bus jerked to a stop, Ethan slipped out into the night. The air smelled of rain on asphalt, of cigarettes smoked down to the filter. He pulled his hood up, blending into the shadows of his own neighborhood. But he couldn't shake the feeling that every window he passed already knew his face. Back at Walmart, the parking lot had thinned to a few scattered cars. James Harris still sat against the wall, Rex curled tightly beside him. The old man's bones ached from the cold, but he stayed. He'd seen humiliation before on the factory floor, when supervisors barked orders at men who'd given decades of their lives. He'd seen it when the bank took his house after the crash, reducing a lifetime to paperwork. But tonight, watching that boy be stripped of dignity in front of strangers had awoken something bitter. World's getting meaner. Rex, he muttered. The dog's ears twitched, eyes fixed on the sliding doors, as if expecting the boy to come back out. Michael O'Connor drifted closer, hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets. He'd walked aimlessly since leaving the store, but his boots had carried him back here. Maybe because he couldn't shake the image of the kid's eyes. How they looked the same as the recruits who never believed they'd make it home. You see that? Michael asked, his voice low, roughened by years of cigarettes and silence. James tilted his head, as if to say, "Of course I did." Reminded me of Basic, Michael continued. Break a man in front of others, and you don't just control him. You own the room. James grunted. Difference is, kid wasn't in the cores. He was bagging groceries. They fell into silence. The hum of the parking lot lights filled the air. Aisha wandered closer, still clutching her half-empty grocery bag. She stood in front of them, small against the night. He didn't steal anything, she said firmly, her young voice carrying more conviction than her size. I saw his face. Neither man argued. Children had a way of naming truths adults tried to smother. Rex rose to his feet, tail flicking once before settling. The dog nudged Iasa's hand with his nose, as if recognizing her defiance. A flicker. Of a smile touched her lips. Downtown, Congressman Robert Miller sat in his apartment, sleepless. The clip looped again on his phone. Ethan's eyes, his son's eyes, looked straight into the lens, not at the manager, not at the customers. Straight into the lens, as if pleading with whoever might be watching. Robert had faced scandals before, had weathered ugly debates and smear campaigns. But this was different. This was his son. And the country was watching. Outside his window, Lake Michigan shimmered under the moonlight, restless, endless. He pressed his palms against the glass. Torn between two roles, public servant and father. Which one would survive the morning? On the south side, Ethan unlocked the front door of his family's apartment. The hallway smelled of old paint and fried onions from a neighbor's kitchen. Inside, the small living room was dim, the only light coming from the birthday decorations taped crookedly to the wall. His little sister, Lily, had fallen asleep on the couch, still clutching the handmade card he'd drawn for her. The sight nearly broke him. He sat beside her, laying the bag gently on the floor. He hadn't brought the sandwich she'd asked for. He hadn't brought anything but the weight of the night. He leaned back, closing his eyes, the voices from Walmart replaying in his head. Trust isn't given. It's earned. And somewhere, faint but growing, another voice, thousands of strangers on the internet, shouting in his defense. Outside Walmart, James, Michael, and Aisha lingered under the buzzing lights. Three lives that rarely intersected had brushed against each other tonight. None of them could name why they stayed. Perhaps because something had shifted. Perhaps because they felt the story wasn't finished. Rex sat between them like a sentinel. Eyes glowing in the dark. In the distance, sirens wailed, slicing through the city's hum. Chicago was restless. And somewhere inside that restlessness, a boy's quiet humiliation was becoming everyone's question. How much dignity is a life worth? Morning came thin and gray, the kind of light that made everything look undecided. Ethan woke on the couch with his jacket still on, and his sister's handmade card stuck to his sleeve. In the kitchen, his mother Lavra stood at the stove frying eggs she couldn't afford, moving with the fixed gentleness of someone who had learned how to be soft so the day wouldn't bruise her children. Eat, she said like a blessing. And a command at once. Then tell me. He told her in pieces, the way a person describes a fall where the ground had been, where it went missing, how the body understood the insult before the mind did. When he reached the part about the bag, about the eyes, Laura's hand halted over the pan. Oil hissed. She turned off the heat and leaned against the counter as if the kitchen were at sea. I'm going back, Ethan said. To talk to him. To make it right. Make what right? Lavra asked. Your dignity or their story? The phone on the table buzzed again and again. He had muted most notifications hours earlier, but new ones found their way through. He flipped it over. A text from an unknown number. I'm with Channel 5. Can you talk? Another. We're staging a walkout tonight. You with us? Another, colder. Nice try, thief. The last one barely registered. The call that did come, the one that made his shoulders go stiff, came without a name attached. He didn't need one. Dad, he said. Ethan, Congressman Miller said, careful, lawyerly. Even in the softness. I saw the video. Of course you did. I want you to know I'm looking at options. If you make a statement, we can shape the narrative. We don't want this turning into what? Ethan asked. Into what? It is? Silence held a beat too long. Stay offline today, his father said finally. Please, son. Let me handle it. How? Ethan asked. By pretending I'm not me? By pretending I don't have a job? By pretending that this doesn't happen to kids who can't call a congressman dad? The line thinned. I'm asking you to be careful. I am careful. Ethan said, that's the problem. I was careful and it still happened. He hung up before the old argument could unspool again, before the differences between two versions of America could set the morning on fire. Larva watched him pocket his phone and finish the eggs without tasting them. When he stood to go, she smoothed his collar, an old ritual from elementary school that still somehow fit around his grief. Outside, the air had sharpened. He pulled his hood up and headed for the bus that would take him back to the store he wasn't sure he still worked at. Across town, the day was already measuring people. In the cafeteria at Isha's school, the cashier held her tray a fraction too long before nodding her through. The kids ahead of her ordered extra milk. The kid behind her asked for a second dessert. No one asked Isha anything. She sat alone. A teacher stopped by her table and smiled without seeing her. "Use your inside voice," the teacher said. Though Aisha hadn't said a word. On her borrowed phone, the clip from Walmart had grown fangs and wings. Someone slowed the footage, circled Ethan's shaking hands in red, added captions, played it over and over. In the comments, people argued about policy, about shoplifting statistics, about how trust ought to be rationed. Aisha scrolled until the words blurred. She drew a small sign on the back of a worksheet in pencil. "Believe kids." She folded it into her pocket as if it were a ticket. At the edge of the Walmart parking lot, James Harris woke from the kind of sleep you fall into when your body gives up before your mind does. His back ached. A tarp had slipped in the night. A corner of him was wet. Rex had kept watch, the dog's chin propped on James's knee, as if guarding a gate only he could see. Morning deliveries rattled past. A forklift beeped. Somewhere nearby, a car backfired. Michael O'Connor's pulse leaped at the sound, old circuits lighting in the dark. His breathing sped, then throttled, then stitched itself back into an even line. He named 5 things in the visible world: brick, cloud, antenna, wrapper, dog, and the panic receded like a wave that had decided this time not to claim him. He glanced at Rex. The dog's ears flicked. Michael whistled low, not to the dog, but to the version of himself that still lived in a desert where men spoke with their hands because the air was an ear full of thunder. At ease, he told his own heartbeat. It listened, "You know that." "Dog," James said. It came out as a question. "I know his training," Michael said. He crouched, palm open. Rex sniffed, then offered a paw without being asked. The old signal passed between them like a wire from one life into another. "Sits," Michael said gently. Rex sat perfectly. Plats. The dog lay down, the movement graceful, unhurried. James's eyes warmed. "They pulled him from a unit after some mess the papers never got right," he said. "Said he wasn't fit for duty. He was. People weren't." A security guard in a too-new jacket walked over, posture already stiff, with the privilege of a uniform. "Morning, fellas," he said, as if the word could be small talk and warning at once. "Can't be camped out here. Store policy," James shifted. "Just warming our bones before we move." "Dog's gotta go," the guard added, pointing. "Customers complain," Michael stood. "He's not a problem." "Rules are rules," the guard said. He didn't look at the dog. He looked past the men, at the storefront he was paid to. "Make frictionless. I can call it in if you like." "Call what?" Asha asked, appearing at James's elbow as if conjured by the question. School let out early on half-days. She had come straight here on her 2 small feet, the paper sign in her pocket, suddenly feeling like a guardrail. "This is a person," she said, nodding at James, then at Rex. "And this is a good dog." The guard's mouth tightened. There was something in the sight of a child addressing him like an equal that unsettled his script. "Kid," he said. Not unkindly, "this isn't your business." "It is," she said, voice steady. "You made it everybody's last night." The guard's radio crackled. Inside, a manager wanted carts brought in. He hesitated, torn between following orders and deploying them. The 3 figures in front of him, old man, dog, girl, refused to sort themselves into a problem he could solve by procedure. He lifted the radio. "I'll be back," he told no one in particular and walked off, trying not to feel relieved. "Brave," James said to Aisha when they were alone again. "Just true," she answered. She knelt and scratched Rex between the ears. "My mom says if you can't be brave, be true, and courage will catch up." Michael studied the girl's face, the thinness at her wrists, the stubborn will in her gaze. He wondered how old you had to be in this city to decide which kind of person you were going to be. He suspected the answer was always, younger than you'd like. Ethan stepped off the bus, with the certainty of someone who didn't know what he would do until his feet put him where he needed to be. The Walmart logo reflected in 100 shallow puddles. He picked his way through them like a man crossing a river made of light. Inside, he returned his badge to the service desk. The woman there, older, with hair the silver of winter roads, looked at the plastic square in his hand as if it were heavier than it looked. "You don't have to decide today," she said quietly. "I already did," he replied. Mr. Collins came from the back, summoned by the mere rumor of Ethan's presence. He had slept, if sleep can be the thing you do when you rest inside your armor. He wore a new tie. His smile was the same. "You caused quite a stir," he said, tone calibrated for the cameras he couldn't see, but assumed were there. "I didn't post the video," Ethan said. "I just existed in front of someone else's lens." "Careful," Collins said, adopting paternal warmth like a coat. "You don't want to be one of those kids who think the world owes them basic respect," Ethan said. The interruption shocked them both, mostly because Ethan wasn't the interrupting kind. "Is that too expensive for your budget?" A murmur rose from the checkouts, not loud but present, like the sound of wind testing a door. Collins's eyes flicked over Ethan's shoulder and away again. He lowered his voice. "We both know. You bent down for that sandwich." "I bent down to pick it up for a customer," Ethan said, and realized how tired he was of narrating his own innocence. "You're suspended pending review," Collins said briskly. "HR will be in touch." "Of course," Ethan said. "Trust isn't given, it's earned." He left the badge on the counter anyway. Outside, as the doors parted, cold air hit his face and made his eyes sting. He blinked until the parking lot came back into focus and saw under the nearest lamppost the small constellation that had begun to gather without him, the old man, the veteran, the girl, the dog. He walked to them as if they were the only solid thing in a world that had turned to watered-up double quotes. "Hey," he said. "Hey," James returned. "You okay?" Michael asked. "Ask me tomorrow," Ethan said. He crouched to Rex's height and put his hand out. The dog sniffed, then pressed its head into his palm with the unsentimental tenderness dogs are best at. Ethan let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. Aisha produced her folded paper. She smoothed it on her knee and held it up. "Believe kids," it said in pencil letters that wobbled only a little. "It's good," Ethan said. "It's true," she corrected. Behind them, a security cart whined to life. The guard from earlier was not alone this time. Another man in a brighter vest rode beside him. They headed toward the group with a purpose that made the air colder. "We'll move," James said, already gathering the tarp, already rehearsing the apology the city demanded from him each hour he dared to exist in public. "Stay," Michael said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. He stepped forward just enough that the guards would have to address him, not the child or the old man. "Morning," he said when they arrived. "Gotta clear this area," the new guard said, glancing at Rex. "And the animal, Hund Abelgen," Michael said softly. Rex lowered himself, chin to pavement, body still as prayer. The syllables German, worn smooth by training grounds and time, changed the shape of the moment. The new guard blinked. The old one shifted. Somewhere, a boundary between threat and companion, between nuisance and neighbor moved a fraction. "He's trained," Michael said. "He's safe." "It's policy," the new guard repeated. But fainter, as if policy were a thing he'd been handed without instructions. Policy can learn. Asho said. The guards looked at each other, at the dog, at the girl, at the boy whose face they recognized from their own phones. The decision they made wasn't heroic. It wasn't even generous. It was simply human. 15 minutes, the new guard said at last and drove on. The old one let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd drawn tight. I don't know your names, Ethan said when they were alone again. James, the old man said. Michael. Aisha. Ethan, he offered, though they already knew. The names settled among them like chairs around a table. A delivery truck rumbled past. A flock of starlings rose from the power lines, braided themselves into a dark silk ribbon, then unwound again. For a moment, the four of them watched the birds with the kind of attention usually reserved for screens, as if the sky were showing them how to move as one without losing themselves. James swayed. Just a little, a thinness in his stance that hadn't been there a minute before. Ethan reached out. Asha did too. Michael took James's elbow without asking. Rex rose, pressed against James's leg, anchoring him to the ground. You eaten? Michael asked, already knowing the answer. Not yet, James said. Ethan glanced at the store, and then back at the man who'd been told to disappear. He pulled the lunchbox from his bag, the one that had been held up for strangers to inspect, like evidence of a crime that never was, and opened it. Laura's sandwich lay wrapped in wax paper. It looked like nothing special, like everything that matters. Share? Ethan asked. James hesitated, the way proud men do when hunger is a witness. We'll make it 4 ways, he said finally. Aisha grinned. 5, she said, tipping her chin at Rex. They ate there under the hum of the parking lot lights. The world still arguing about policy without knowing that it was watching a family form out of accident and choice. Somewhere downtown, a congressman rehearsed a statement in a mirror. Somewhere on the south side, a mother on her second shift checked her phone and frowned at the outrage it contained. Somewhere in a quiet office with cameras, a manager drafted an email about standards. And here, at the edge of a store where America came to buy the same things and pretend it made them the same people. A boy, a veteran, a child, a man without an address, and a retired working dog practiced another kind of economy, one of small protections, small truths, small meals split until everyone had enough to keep standing. When they finished, Ethan wiped his hands on a napkin and looked at the faces around him. The morning had decided a few things after all. It had decided, for instance, that they would not be strangers anymore. A car door slammed. A voice called out, curious, not hostile. Hey, aren't you the kid from the video? Ethan met the voice with his own. I'm the kid, he said. But this is the story. He gestured to the little circle they made. It held. It would be tested soon. But for now, it held. James Harris had not always lived on the sidewalks. There was a time when he carried a lunch pail to the steel plant every morning, when his back was straight and his name meant something on the foreman's roster. 30 years on the line, building the city's bones out of steel beams and sweat. Then came the layoffs. Then came the mortgage notices, the bank letters written in a language colder than winter. His wife packed a suitcase one night and left without ceremony, tired of sleeping beside a man whose pride kept him from begging for help. The crash had swallowed him whole. No second act, no recovery. Just a slow drift from couch to shelter to street. Now, the city didn't see him. Or worse, it saw him as a warning. Mothers pulled their children closer when he shuffled by. Office workers averted their eyes as if homelessness were contagious. Get a job, strangers muttered, as though jobs grew on trees watered by shame. Rex was the only one who stayed. The dog had been discarded, too retired early after a mission went wrong. A handler blamed him for a suspect slipping through. Paperwork sealed his fate. James found him chained to a shelter gate, ribs showing. 2 lives judged disposable had fused into one, Sometimes at night, James would whisper to Rex, "They think we're finished, but I see you, old boy. You've still got fight." The dog's amber eyes would gleam in the dark, as if to answer. So do you. Michael O'Connor's story carried different scars. He had been 19 when the Marines stamped his name on a uniform, 20 when he saw his first firefight. By 25, he had seen more friends lowered into the ground than birthdays celebrated. His discharge papers called it honorable. The shadows that followed him home called it something else. In Chicago, Michael was another veteran promised everything and given nothing. The VA clinic had a 6-month wait list. Jobs dried up when his temper flared in interviews. He drank to sleep, drank to forget, drank until forgetting felt like drowning and waking felt like failure. Still, some part of him clung to order. He folded his few clothes with military corners. He kept his boots by his bed, even when the soles were worn thin. He walked the city like a patrol route, scanning rooftops, alleys, always alert to threats that weren't there. People thought he was dangerous. What he really was afraid. Afraid of losing the last threads of control he still held. That morning, after splitting Ethan's sandwich in the parking lot, Michael had walked James to a soup kitchen on 63rd Street. The line stretched down the block, men in hoodies, women with tired eyes, children clutching backpacks. The smell of stale coffee and bleach seeped into the air. Volunteers in matching t-shirts bustled around with trays. When James reached the front, the server glanced at his coat, at Rex's collar, and frowned. "No dogs." "He's not just a dog," James said quietly. "He's my partner." "Health code," the server replied, eyes already sliding to the next in line. Michael stepped forward, his presence filling the doorway like a shadow. "The dog stays," he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of command, the kind that made people sit straighter without knowing why. The volunteer hesitated. Others in line began to murmur. Finally, a supervisor emerged, exhaling through her nose. "Fine, but in the corner. And keep him leashed." James muttered thanks, but humiliation stuck in his throat like dry bread. He carried his tray to a table, Rex at his side, and tried not to notice the stares. Across from him, Michael ate in silence. Then he said, almost to himself, "Funny thing. We fight wars overseas for freedom. Come home, and we're treated like liabilities." James nodded, chewing slowly. "World doesn't want reminders," he said. "We're reminders." Michael looked at him for a long time. Then, with the faintest flicker of a smile, said, "Maybe we're reminders they need." Rex laid his head on the table edge, eyes flicking between them, as if to agree. Isha Johnson walked home from school with her backpack bumping against her thin shoulders. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across cracked sidewalks where weeds grew through the concrete like stubborn hopes refusing to die. She lived with her mother in a 2-bedroom apartment above a laundromat that never seemed to close. Her mother, Denise, worked 2 jobs days at the hospital as a nursing aide, nights at a diner off the highway. Aisha often fell asleep to the hum of dryers downstairs, waiting for her mother to come home. When she did, her scrubs carried the smell of bleach and exhaustion. At school, Aisha felt the weight of being seen and unseen at the same time. Teachers praised her neat handwriting, then marked her tardy when she missed first period because the bus skipped her block. Kids whispered about her skin, the way her hair curled tight. "She's from the projects," they said, like it was a diagnosis. That afternoon, in the cafeteria, she opened her donated lunch bag. The bread was stale, the apple bruised. The boy next to her wrinkled his nose and slid his pizza slice farther away, as if poverty were something you could catch like a cough. Ashia ate quietly, back straight, eyes on her tray. She had learned that dignity meant swallowing what hurt. Later, she heard 2 girls laughing near the lockers, replaying the Walmart video on one of their phones. "Look at him, he's so guilty." One sneered. Asha's chest tightened. They didn't know Ethan, but she had seen his face, the way shame flushed his cheeks even as he stood tall. She wanted to scream that they were wrong, but instead she walked past, clutching her book's tighter dot in her pocket, the folded sign she had drawn. Believe kids burned like a secret she wasn't ready to show the world yet. Meanwhile, Ethan Miller tried to return to normal life, though normal had abandoned him. At school, whispers trailed him down the hallways. Some classmates patted his back, called him brave. Others smirked, called him sandwich boy. Teachers gave him sympathetic looks, which somehow hurt more than accusations. That night, at home, the tension in the Miller apartment was thick. Lavra cooked dinner with the news playing low in the background. Every channel replayed the clip. Analysts debated Walmart's responsibility, corporate policy, the treatment of teenage workers. Nobody asked Ethan how it felt to have his dignity bartered for ratings. When his father called again, it wasn't to ask how he was doing, Congressman. Robert Miller wanted strategy. The press is spinning this as class warfare, he said. We can leverage it. If you're willing to speak at a press conference, I'm not your campaign, Ethan snapped. Silence hung heavy. You think this is just about you, his father finally said. Everything you do reflects on me. On us, then maybe. That's the problem, Ethan replied, his voice shaking. After he hung up, he sat in the dark with his little sister Lily, who had crawled onto his lap. She didn't care about politics or headlines. She only asked, why were they so mean to you? Ethan had no answer. He held her tighter, staring at the glow of the TV across the room where his own face flickered over and over, as if humiliation had become public property. That weekend, Ethan found himself back at the Walmart parking lot, though he didn't know why. Maybe he wanted to prove he wasn't afraid. Maybe he wanted to see if anyone else remembered. He spotted James and Michael first, sitting on the curb with Rex stretched between them like a living bridge. Aisha was there too, her pink coat bright against the gray pavement. She waved shyly. When Ethan approached, "Thought you'd stay away," Michael said. "I tried," Ethan admitted. "Didn't work." James chuckled dryly. "The world doesn't let you stay away when it decides you're the story." Aisha reached into her backpack and pulled out the folded paper. She opened it and held it up, her pencil letters bold despite their shakiness. "Believe kids." For the first time in days, Ethan smiled. A small one, but real. Rex barked once, short and sharp, as if to mark the moment, and there, in the shadow of the store that had humiliated him, 4 unlikely lives sat together. A boy, a girl, a veteran, a homeless man, and a dog the world had written off. None of them fit neatly into society's boxes. All of them carried scars the city preferred to ignore, but together, for the first time, they didn't feel invisible. The days after the video went viral felt like a storm that wouldn't end. The city moved faster, louder, harsher. For those already living on its edges, the noise was suffocating. James Harris tried to sleep under the viaduct on 47th Street, but a patrol car pulled up, lights flashing red and blue against the concrete. 2 officers stepped out, their boots echoing. "Move along," one said. Voice clipped. "I'm not bothering anyone," James replied, his breath fogging in the cold. "Loitering." The other officer snapped, "You can't stay here." James looked at Rex, curled tight beside him, then back at the officers. "Where do you want me to go?" "Not our problem." They stood until James gathered his tarp and pack. Rex rose slowly, stiff from the cold, but alert. As James walked into the night, humiliation burned in his chest. A man without a home had no right to a corner of concrete. Michael O'Connor sat in the waiting room of the VA clinic, a number crumpled in his hand. The clock on the wall ticked, but no names were called. Hours passed. He closed his eyes, the fluorescent buzz drilling into his skull. When his turn finally came, the nurse glanced at his chart, then at him. 6 months for therapy intake, 12 for housing assistance. Michael swallowed hard. I can't wait 12 months. The nurse sighed, already moving to the next form. I'm sorry, sir. That's the system. Michael left with nothing but a pamphlet in his pocket. Outside, he lit a cigarette with shaking hands, the taste bitter. He thought about the men he had carried out of fire, the orders he had followed without hesitation. And here, in his own country, he was told to wait. At school, Aishi faced her own quiet battles. She had drawn another sign, "Respect us," and taped it inside her locker. When two boys saw it, they laughed. "Respect?" one sneered. "Maybe. If you weren't so poor." They yanked the paper down, crumpled it, and tossed it in the trash. Ashaya's cheeks burned. She wanted to fight back, but the words stuck like stones in her throat. When she got home that night, she sat on the steps outside the laundromat, hugging her knees until her mother came back from her shift. "Baby, what's wrong?" Denise asked, kneeling in front of her, eyes tired but searching. Aisha shook her head. "Nothing." Because how do you tell your mother the world sees you as less, when she's fighting every day to prove otherwise? Ethan couldn't escape the weight of the video. At school, whispers followed him. On the bus, strangers pointed. Online, his face was everywhere. Memes, hashtags, arguments. One evening, he sat in his room staring at the badge he had turned in. The words Walmart associate gleamed under the lamplight. It wasn't just a piece of plastic. It was proof of work, of effort, of trying to stand on his own. And it had been stripped from him in seconds. He heard his father's voice in his head, the clipped tone of politics. Trust isn't given. It's earned. But Ethan had earned it. He had worked late shifts, skipped parties, carried groceries for strangers. And still one manager's suspicion had erased it all. For the first time, Ethan felt the edges of despair. Not because of what had happened, but because of how easily the world believed the worst of him. That night, by some invisible pull, they all found themselves back at the Walmart lot. James sat slumped on the curb, Rex at his side. Michael leaned against the lamppost, smoke curling from his cigarette. Azisha held her mother's hand but broke away when she saw Ethan approach. "You look tired," she said softly. Ethan smiled faintly. "So do you." They didn't need to explain. Each of them carried a different wound, but the pain was familiar. The sting of being told you were less. The city around them buzzed with life sirens, honking cars, neon signs. Yet in that small circle of light, they shared a silence that was heavier than words. For a moment, Ethan thought, maybe nothing changes. Maybe this is just how the world is. But then Rex stood, placing himself in the center of the group, head high, tail still. His presence was steady, grounding. Michael reached down to rest a hand on the dog's neck. Asisha slipped her folded sign, "Believe kids," into Ethan's hand. James lifted his chin, weary but unbroken. In that fragile constellation of the unwanted, a spark flickered. Not hope, not yet, but something that looked a little like it. The city cracked open on a Friday night. By then, the video had become something bigger than Ethan Miller, bigger than Walmart, bigger than one boy's humiliation. It was a spark dropped into dry grass. Hashtags marched across screens. Cable news anchors debated policy in clipped tones. And across Chicago, people began to gather. It started with a few college kids holding cardboard signs outside the store. Respect workers, dignity isn't optional. By evening, the crowd had swelled. Teachers, janitors, delivery drivers, parents with strollers. And woven through them were faces like James Harris's and Michael O'Connor's, faces the city usually stepped over. Tonight they stood in the open, part of something larger. Ethan arrived hesitant, hood pulled low, heart pounding. He hadn't planned to come, but his feet had led him anyway. When he saw the crowd, saw strangers chanting his name without even knowing him, he felt both exposed and carried. Asisha spotted him first, tugging at her mother's hand, and waved with the fierce joy of someone who finally saw proof. That truth could be loud. James leaned on his cane. Rex pressed close to his leg. For once, no one shooed him away. Michael stood with a cluster of veterans, their old uniforms mismatched, their voices rough but certain as they chanted with the crowd. Inside, store managers watched from behind the glass doors, whispering into phones, debating whether to call more security. Mr. Collins stood among them, jaw clenched, eyes darting toward the boy who had ignited all this. When the first line of police cars rolled in, lights strobing red and blue, the crowd only grew louder. The officers formed a wall, shields gleaming under the parking lot lamps. The chants rose. Justice for Ethan. Respect for all. Ethan felt his chest tighten. He hadn't asked for this. But now he saw his humiliation stitched into everyone else's stories. James's eviction, Michael's forgotten service, Aisha's laughter-stained bruises. His small wound had bled into the city's larger ones. A police officer lifted a bullhorn, voice booming. "This is an unlawful assembly. Disperse immediately." The crowd answered with louder chants, the sound ricocheting off the walls, filling the night with defiance. Ethan's palms were slick. He wanted to run, but then Aisha slipped her hand into his, steady and sure. "Don't be afraid," she whispered. James straightened, his spine protesting, but his voice steady. "They need to see us. All of us." Michael flicked his cigarette to the ground and stepped forward, planting himself between the police line and the people behind him. "We're not moving," he said. His words carried like gunfire. The air trembled, heavy with the threat of collision. Sirens wailed in the distance, another convoy arriving. The city had chosen its battleground, a parking lot, a store. A boy who had simply tried to work and gone home with his dignity in pieces. And standing at the center of it all, Ethan realized this wasn't just his story anymore. It belonged to everyone who had ever been told they were less. The night waited, breathless for the first crack. The chant swelled until it felt like the pavement itself was vibrating. 1,000 voices carried one name, one demand. Then the sound, fractured as a bottle, hit the asphalt with a sharp crack, rolling toward the police line. Nobody knew who had thrown it. Nobody cared. The officers shifted, shields rising in a single practiced motion. "Back!" The bullhorn barked. "Step back now." The crowd answered with fury, voices raw. Ethan felt Azizi's grip tighten on his hand, her small knuckles white. James leaned heavier on his cane, but his chin lifted stubbornly. Michael stepped forward again, hands raised, his voice cutting through the noise. "These are workers, parents, children," he shouted. "Not criminals. Don't treat them like enemies." For a heartbeat, the words hung in the cold air. Then, an officer advanced, shield thrusting forward. The front row stumbled. Someone screamed. Someone else shouted to hold the line. Ethan's pulse hammered. The world shrank to the flash of lights, the crush of bodies, the heat of breath. His humiliation had been private once, a quiet scar. Now it was public, dangerous, alive. Rex barked suddenly, deep and sharp, breaking the moment. The dog lunged just far enough to plant himself between the officers and the boy. His bark wasn't violence, it was warning, protective, the kind of sound that reminded everyone he had once been trained to guard lives, not threaten them. For an instant, even the police froze, recognizing discipline in the animal's stance. Aisha raised her voice then, surprising herself. "He didn't steal," she cried, high and clear. "He didn't steal anything." Her words cut through like a bell. Faces turned toward her, toward Ethan, toward the truth. Phones lifted higher, screens glowing. The story was being written. In real time, every frame captured. Inside the store, Collins pressed his palms against the glass, watching the chaos he had sparked spiral beyond control. He had believed it was just one boy, one bag, one moment. Now he saw the scale of it. A crowd refusing to be silent. A dog commanding attention. A little girl's voice shaking the night. Ethan felt the heat of shame and anger surge in him all at once. He pulled free of fear and shouted, not for himself, but for all of them, "I'm not a thief. I'm a worker. Just like them. Just like you." His voice cracked, but it carried. The line of police faltered. Not much, but enough. The chants returned louder, no longer just his name, but there's two James. Michael, Aisha. The faceless crowd had faces now, stories. The standoff teetered there, balanced on the edge of collapse or change. Sirens wailed again in the distance. Closer now, promising escalation. But for that moment, the crowd held, refusing to bend. And Ethan realized the truth. His humiliation had started this, but it no longer belonged to him. It belonged to everyone who had ever been told they were less, and tonight, none of them would step back. The third siren cut through the night. Closer, sharper, joined by the low rumble of vans pulling into the lot. Doors slammed. A fresh line of officers poured out, heavier gear, visors down. The crowd swayed but did not break. Ethan felt the pull of panic in his gut. This was bigger than him now, bigger than anything he had imagined when he clocked in for a shift at Walmart. Yet all eyes kept darting toward him, the boy from the video, the accidental symbol. He wanted to disappear, but Aisha's small hand anchored him. The first push came fast. Shields pressed forward, shoving bodies back. People stumbled, signs snapped in half. Someone yelled. Someone else fell. The air filled with the bitter tang of pepper spray. James braced on his cane, his free hand clutching Rex's collar. "Easy, boy," he whispered, but his own legs trembled. An officer shoved past, nearly knocking him to the ground. Ethan lunged, grabbing James's arm just in time. The cameras caught it. An old homeless man almost trampled, a teenager holding him up. The image would loop on screens before dawn. Michael moved next, stepping into the narrowing space, planting himself squarely in front of the shields. His voice boomed, carrying like it had across desert camps. "These are civilians, stand down." For a second it worked. A few officers hesitated, glancing at each other. They saw not a vagrant, not a drunk, but a Marine, scars etched into his face, commanding with a voice they'd been trained to obey. Then orders crackled through radios, and the wall pressed forward again. And then, in the middle of it all, a new voice rose, not a chant, not a scream, clear, trembling, but defiant. It was Aisha. She had climbed onto the hood of a parked car, her pink coat right under the floodlights. She held her sign high above her head, the pencil letters shaky but visible. "Believe kids." The crowd roared. Phones angled upward, capturing the tiny figure daring to shout at a line of armored men. "He didn't steal." She cried again, louder. "You treat us like we're nothing, but we are something. We are people." For a heartbeat, the world seemed to stop. Even the police line faltered, their boots uncertain. Inside the store, Collins felt his throat tighten. He knew then. This had spun beyond him, beyond the company, beyond control. A child's words had pierced where policies and press releases could not. Ethan looked up at her, the girl who had first handed him a cookie in silence, now carrying the weight of a crowd on her voice. His shame, his fear, they cracked. What poured out instead was fury, and love, and something larger than himself. "This ends tonight," he shouted, stepping forward, facing the shields. "No more treating us like criminals for being poor. No more silencing kids because they don't look the way you want. We are here. We're not invisible anymore." The crowd erupted. The chant shifted, growing teeth. "We are here. We are here." And for the first time, Ethan saw fear not in the protesters, not in the homeless or the children, but in the eyes behind the visors of the men sent to control them. The night had tipped. Something irreversible had begun. The tear gas still lingered in the wind as the city slipped back into uneasy silence. The crowd hadn't disappeared. It broke into smaller knots of people, their eyes red, their voices raw, but their chants of, "We are here," still echoing like an aftershock. The police pulled back, not out of mercy, but because one more push might have tipped everything into a place they couldn't control. Ethan dropped onto the curb, chest heaving, hands trembling with adrenaline. Beside him, Ashia clutched her. Crumpled paper sign, "Believe kids," its letters smudged in the streetlight, but the pride burning in her eyes brighter than any lamp above them. James coughed until his ribs hurt, his breath thin in the cold. He'd survived hunger, rain, endless winters on the street, but the sting of gas still broke him down. Rex pressed close to his side, amber eyes sharp, guarding him against shadows. Michael crouched nearby, rewrapping a strip of cloth around his wrist where a shield had caught him. His gaze was far away, not on the parking lot, but on another. Night years ago, when soldiers had been lined up like enemies instead of brothers, a news van arrived late. Cameras swung toward the ragged crowd, searching for spectacle. A reporter smoothed her hair, microphone in hand, and began her segment. In a steady, practiced voice, a surprise protest broke out tonight in Chicago. Her words turned suffering into sound bites, lives into headlines. Ethan stared at the lens, knowing that tomorrow his face would be replayed again and again, no longer trembling under Walmart's fluorescent lights, but standing in defiance. Before riot shields, miles away, Congressman Robert Miller sat in his high-rise, a glass of bourbon trembling in his hand. On the screen, his son's eyes burned back at him, eyes pleading, fierce, unyielding. Phones rang around him. Advisors, colleagues, reporters. He ignored them all. For the first time in years, Robert felt the weight of a choice he couldn't. Outsource, protect his career, or protect his child. Morning brought the storm. News outlets screamed. Riots at Walmart. Though no windows had broken, Walmart issued a statement blaming a few disruptive individuals. Collins was suspended, pending review, though he knew deep down that a different wind could bring him back, maybe even promoted for maintaining order. Online, the country split in two. Half hailed Ethan as a new symbol of dignity and labor rights. Half mocked him as Sandwich Boy, a spoiled troublemaker. Nobody asked about James being driven off sidewalks, or Michael sitting lost on wait lists, or Asha being ridiculed at school. They only needed a face to love or hate. At school, Ethan walked the hallway under a wall of whispers. Some clapped him on the back, others smirked as he passed. His teacher paused at the board when he entered, then wrote on in silence. At the back, Ashua raised her paper sign just high enough for him to see. The nod she gave him was the only warmth in the room. Elsewhere, James tried to duck into a coffee shop just to warm his hands. The manager blocked him at the door. "We don't serve beggars," the man said flatly. James froze, pride and shame warring inside him, until Rex tugged gently at his sleeve, pulling him away. Michael stood in line at City Hall with other veterans, demanding to speak to someone about housing, about treatment, about promises left broken. When he finally reached the desk, a clerk shook her head. "We hear you, but the budget's stretched thin." He folded the appointment slip into his pocket, its weight like nothing at all. Everywhere they turned, the walls pressed closer. Ethan branded, James rejected, Michael dismissed, Aisha bracing for worse at school. Each of them shoved to the margins, again and again. And yet, that night, they found themselves back together. No calls, no plans, just a quiet magnetism pulling them to the same place, the Walmart parking lot. Ethan sat down on the curb, looking at the faces around him, then said softly, almost like a prayer, "Maybe they'll win the little fights. But as long as we're still here, looking at each other, nobody's won the war." No one answered. They didn't need to. Rex rested, his head on Ethan's knee, warm and steady. For a brief moment, in the cold yellow glow of the streetlights, something fragile held them together. The belief that truth, however small, could not be buried forever. The following week, the city turned their struggle into a spectacle. A late-night comedy show aired a skit. An actor in a Walmart vest, fumbling with a bag of bread, while another strutted in as the big bad manager. Laughter tracks filled the pauses. The audience clapped on cue. Ethan watched the clip on a classmate's phone, his stomach tightening. What had been pain, his humiliation, had become punchlines for strangers. At school, a teacher invited him to share his experience during civics. The request sounded noble, but when Ethan stood, his throat closed. The eyes staring at him weren't curious. They were hungry, eager to dissect him. He muttered a few words, then sat down, cheeks burning. Later, he overheard two kids whisper. Thought he'd be more inspiring. James, meanwhile, discovered his face in a newspaper photograph leaning on his cane beside Ethan during the protest. The caption read, "Homeless agitator spotted at scene." He stared at the word agitator until it blurred. A man who once built skyscrapers, now reduced to a threat for daring to stand still in public. He folded the paper into his coat pocket and left it there, like a stone pressing against his ribs. Michael tried applying for a security job at a warehouse. The interviewer skimmed his resume, paused at his military history, and frowned. "You're overqualified," the man said carefully, as if overqualified meant unemployable. Michael's jaw clenched. He knew what the man really saw. Someone broken, unstable, unpredictable. Someone who might snap. He walked out without shaking hands. Aisha's mother received a call from the school. "Your daughter's been disruptive," the principal said. She brought protest slogans into the classroom. Denise stared at the phone, exhausted from her night shift. "She drew a sign," she said quietly. "A child sign." The principal's voice sharpened. "We need to ensure she's not influenced by radical elements." Radical elements. A 10-year-old with a piece of notebook paper. The irony was relentless. The same city that mocked them, dismissed them, shoved them aside, now used their images to sell headlines, fuel debates, even sell ads between segments. Dignity had become currency, and none of them got paid. That night, the group gathered again in the Walmart lot. The place had become a strange kind of home, not because it welcomed them, but because nowhere else did. Ethan sat with his back against the wall, voice low. "They'll twist everything we do. If we stay silent, they say we're guilty. If we speak, they say we're dangerous. If we fight back, they laugh." James nodded slowly. "That's the game. Been playing it for years. You can't win by their rules." Michael exhaled smoke into the night, eyes narrowed. "So we stopped playing." Aisha hugged her knees, chin resting on them. "Then what do we do?" Silence stretched. A car drove past, headlights flashing briefly across their faces. Rex shifted, laying his head on Ethan's lap, steady as stone. Ethan looked around at the circle, at the man discarded, the soldier forgotten, the girl dismissed, the dog written off. And he realized, maybe their power wasn't in convincing the world. Maybe it was in refusing to disappear, no matter how many times they were told to. "Then we keep showing up," Ethan said. "Finally. Right here. Every night if we have to, we don't vanish. That's how we win." Rex gave a single sharp bark, as if sealing the vow. The Walmart lot was quieter that night. No crowds, no chants, no sirens. Just 4 people and a dog, sitting. In the kind of silence that doesn't ask to be broken. James was the first to speak. His voice rasped, like gravel dragged across concrete. "Funny thing, I used to help build this city. Steel beams, bridges, high-rises." He gestured vaguely toward the skyline glowing in the distance. "Now the same city won't give me a bench to rest on." Ethan looked at him, startled. "You worked construction?" 30 years, James said. "Laid steel that holds up half of downtown. Never thought I'd end up outside the buildings I built." Ethan opened his mouth, then closed it again. He'd never considered that the man people called a vagrant had literally built the city they walked on. Shame prickled under his skin, not shame for James, but shame for the blind way he'd thought about people like him. Michael broke the silence next. He was leaning against the wall, cigarette smoke curling into the dark. "You think that's bad? Try serving your country, coming home with medals, and then being told you're too broken to hire." James gave a dry chuckle. "Guess they like using people up." Michael flicked ash onto the pavement. "Yeah, country's real good at pretending not to know you once you've outlived your use." Ayesha's small voice cut through the heaviness. "But you're not useless." She looked from one man to the other, her face stubborn in the glow of the lamppost. "You're still here. You're still teaching me stuff. That counts." Neither man answered right away. Michael dropped his cigarette, ground it out with the toe of his boot. James blinked hard, as if smoke had stung his eyes. Ethan cleared his throat. "When Collins searched my bag, I thought I was nothing, just a thief in their eyes. But then when you all stood there," his voice cracked. He stopped, rubbed his palms together. "You made me feel like maybe I wasn't crazy for believing I deserved respect." Ayesha smiled at him, wide and earnest. "Because you do." Rex shifted closer, resting his heavy head in Ethan's lap again. The boy's fingers threaded unconsciously through the coarse fur. Michael noticed how natural it looked, like the dog had appointed Ethan, his second handler. James tapped his cane softly against the pavement. "Maybe that's all we got left. Showing up for each other. No one else is gonna do it." For a while no one spoke. The night hummed around them, distant sirens, a truck downshifting on the freeway, the flutter of a plastic bag caught in a fence. Then Ethan reached into his bag and pulled out a sandwich. He tore it in half, handed one piece to James. "It's not much," he said, "but it's better shared." James hesitated, then accepted it. Michael took the other half when Ethan split again, and a Cheyenne nibbled from Michael's hand. Rex got the last bite, tail thumping once against the asphalt. It wasn't a feast. It wasn't victory. But in that small circle, food passed hand to hand, something shifted. The barriers between homeless and worker, veteran and child, human and animal thinned until only people remained. For the first time since it all began, Ethan felt something like hope. Not because the world had changed, but because they had chosen not to let it crush them. Collins hadn't been sleeping well. Since the protest, his name had been dragged across news tickers and Twitter threads, strangers dissecting his every gesture, freeze-framing his face mid-scowl. His wife had stopped reading the comments. His teenage son wouldn't look him in the eye. He told himself he'd just done his job. Company policy. Random checks, nothing personal. That was the mantra. But late at night, when the house went still, Collins replayed the moment Ethan's voice had cracked under the fluorescent lights. He remembered the handmade birthday card in the bag, the way the boy had clutched it like it was worth more than money. One evening, Collins drove past the Walmart lot on his way home. He slowed when he saw them. The boy, the old man, the vet, the little girl, and the dog. A ragtag circle in the glow of a street lamp. They weren't shouting. They weren't even holding signs. Just being. Something in that sight gnawed at him. He pulled into a parking space, engine idling. For a minute he almost turned back, pride snarling inside him. But then he cut the engine, stepped out, and crossed the lot. The group went quiet when they noticed him. Ethan stiffened, hand hovering near Rex's collar. Michael's shoulders squared. James's grip tightened on his cane. Aisha stood half behind Ethan, eyes narrowed. Collins stopped a few feet away. The night air felt sharp in his lungs. His voice cracked. He coughed, tried again. "I came to say something." Ethan's face was unreadable, somewhere between anger and exhaustion. What could you possibly have to say? Collins shifted his weight, his polished shoes awkward on the rough pavement. "That night, I thought I was protecting the store, protecting order. But maybe I was just protecting my own fear. He exhaled, the words tasting strange on his tongue. And I humiliated you for it. The silence that followed was heavier than shouting. James tapped his cane once. Michael's jaw clenched. Aisha tilted her head, watching him with a child's raw honesty. Ethan didn't move. He didn't trust it yet. So what? He asked. Collins swallowed. He pulled something from his pocket, a folded slip of paper. He held it out awkwardly. Corporate wants this to go away. They'll offer money. I thought you should know. Ethan didn't. Reach for it. And what do you want? For the first time in weeks, Collins had no answer ready. He stared at the boy, the dog, the circle of lives he'd once written off as trouble. Something in their stillness unsettled him more than any protest had. Finally he said, maybe. I want to understand what I didn't see. The words landed like a stone in a pond. No applause, no forgiveness, just ripples spreading slowly in the dark. Rex rose, tail flicking once. He stepped closer to Collins, sniffed his hand, then settled back by James's feet. It wasn't approval, but it wasn't rejection either. And, for the first time, Collins didn't feel like the man in charge. He just felt like another person standing in the cold, searching for a place where dignity still meant something. Collins sat in his car long after leaving the Walmart lot. The steering wheel felt slick beneath his palms, though his hands weren't sweating. He stared at the dashboard lights, green and steady, indifferent to the storm inside him. He had built his whole life on rules. Rules made sense. They told him who belonged and who didn't. Growing up, his father used to say, "The world stays in order when everyone knows their place." Collins had believed it. He still wanted to. Because if the world wasn't orderly, then what was it? Chaos. And chaos terrified him. But tonight, he'd seen something he couldn't file away into order. A boy who should have been broken standing taller than he did. A homeless man who once built skyscrapers. A Marine who still carried battlefields in his chest. A little girl holding up a hand-drawn sign like it could keep the whole night from collapsing. He had called them nuisances, liabilities, threats. Yet when he looked at them, he saw something steadier than the ground under his own shoes. He saw people who had lost everything, home, safety, respect, and still refused to vanish. His phone buzzed in the cup holder. A message from his district. Manager, corporate says good job containing the incident. Press statement tomorrow at 8. Stick to the script. The script. He knew it by heart already. Words about isolated events, about safety protocols, about commitment to community. Words that erased the boy's trembling hands, the old man's cough, the child's voice in the dark. Collins pressed his forehead against the steering wheel, eyes burning. He thought of Ethan's question, and what do you want? What did he want? For years, the answer had been simple. Stability, promotions, a paycheck big enough to keep the mortgage safe. But now, with the script glowing on his phone, he wasn't so sure. At home, his son Tyler would be waiting up. 16 years old, restless, angry in ways Collins didn't always understand. Tyler had seen the video too. Had asked him, "Dad, why'd you treat him like that?" Collins had snapped back, "You don't know the whole story." But even as he said it, he knew the boy's eyes had already judged him. Collins lifted his head. The parking lot was empty now, just a few stray carts clattering in the wind. But he could still feel their presence. The circle of four and the dog, sitting steady under the streetlight. People the world had written off. People he'd written off. And for the first time, Collins wondered if maybe the order he'd clung to all his life wasn't order at all. Maybe it was just cruelty dressed up as discipline. The thought scared him more than losing his job. Because if it was true, then he'd spent years defending something hollow. And there's no script for what to do when the rules you built yourself start to crumble. The scandal didn't break with a whisper. It hit like a hammer. On Tuesday morning, the Chicago Tribune ran an expose, leaked memos from Walmart's regional office. Pages of instructions buried under corporate jargon. But the meaning was unmistakable. Heightened scrutiny recommended for high-risk demographics. High risk meant poor. High risk meant young. High risk meant black and brown. The memos even listed behaviors to monitor. Shopping alone at night, using public transit, paying with cash, carrying worn bags. Behaviors that described half the city. By noon, the story had spread across national networks. Anchors read the memos aloud with disbelief, their voices trembling between outrage and ratings thrill. Hashtags exploded. Hashtag shopping while poor. Hashtag bag check policy. Hashtag Ethan didn single quotes T-Steal. And then came the second blow. Buried in the documents, highlighted by some anonymous whistleblower, was a congressional committee vote 5 years earlier. A vote to block stricter labor protections that would have made such policies illegal. One of the votes in favor, Congressman Robert Miller, Ethan's father. The news cycle spun like a storm. Overnight, Ethan was no longer just the kid from the Walmart video. He was the congressman's son, proof of hypocrisy carved into living flesh. The narrative wasn't about one boy anymore. It was about a system that protected profits over dignity, and a politician who had quietly signed his name to it. At home, Lavra Miller clutched the newspaper, her hands shaking. She looked at her son, then at the man pacing the kitchen, suit jacket off, tie loosened. Robert Miller's face was gray, his eyes bloodshot. "I didn't know it would come to this," he muttered. "It was just one vote, one line in a budget. No one reads those bills in full." Ethan slammed his fist on the table. "You voted for it. You made it possible for men like Collins to treat people like criminals. You made it possible for this to happen to me." Robert flinched. For a moment, the congressman disappeared, and only the father remained, a man who had lost control of the story, of his son, of himself. "Ethan," he said softly, "I was trying to protect the economy. The economy doesn't look at me when I'm standing in front of a crowd with my bag open." Ethan shot back. "That was a man, Dad, that was you." The room fell silent. Laura's eyes brimmed with tears, not from shock, but from recognition. She had always known her husband's career took precedence over their family. Now the world knew too, outside. Reporters had already gathered on the street, cameras flashing like lightning. Neighbors peeked from windows. The Miller home had become a stage. And across town, James unfolded the newspaper at the shelter, muttering, "So that's the face behind the rules." Michael, reading over his shoulder, exhaled smoke. No wonder the kid looked like the whole world was on his back. Even Aisha saw it on the TV in her classroom. Kids turned to look at her, whispering. She sat taller, chin high. If Ethan was carrying that weight, then she'd carry her sign higher too. In one morning, the battle lines shifted. It was no longer about one boy and one store. It was about a system unmasked and a father's betrayal standing in the middle of it. The city devoured the news like wildfire. By evening, cable hosts shouted over each other about systemic bias and corporate overreach. Protesters filled streets outside Walmarts across Illinois. Hand-painted signs bobbed in the crowd. "We're not suspects. Dignity isn't a crime," but not everyone was chanting. Online, venom spread just as fast. "Kid's only getting attention 'cause he's a congressman's son. Bet he actually did steal." Look at his face. Homeless agitators, fake veterans, loud enough kids. What's next? Dogs demanding rights. Ethan read too many of them. Each word burrowed under his skin until he couldn't tell where their hatred ended and his doubt began. He sat at the edge of his bed, phone in hand, shoulders hunched. Lily padded in with her blanket, climbed into his lap, and whispered, "They don't know you." For a moment, her small weight was the only thing keeping him from breaking. James faced it in the flesh. At the shelter, Men muttered when they recognized him from the photos. "Congratulations," one said bitterly. "You're famous now. See if fame buys you a bed." Later, when James lined up at the soup kitchen, the server hesitated, tray halfway in the air. "You're the guy on TV, right?" "The protester?" James nodded. The tray slammed down harder than it had to. He ate in silence, the word agitator echoing louder than hunger. Michael tried to hold his ground, but the system pressed back. At the VA, a clerk squinted at him. "You were out there last week? The protest?" Michael straightened. "Yeah, and?" The clerk's lips tightened. "Just noting it. Could complicate your case file." He walked out before rage could make him reckless. Outside, he leaned against the brick wall, cigarette shaking in his fingers, and wondered if fighting for dignity meant losing what little help he had left. Even a Sisha wasn't spared. At school, a boy shoved her shoulder. "Radical," he hissed. Another whispered, "Troublemaker." The principal called her mother again, suggesting outside. Influences were affecting her behavior. Denise stood in the office, scrub top stained from a double shift, and said flatly, "My daughter's influence is knowing what's right." Her voice didn't waver, but her hands trembled as she signed the warning slip. That night, they gathered. Again in the Walmart lot, the only place that still felt like theirs. The air was colder now, the kind that settled in your bones. They sat in their small circle, silent at first. "They're turning on us," James said finally. His voice was flat, worn thin. Michael flicked ash into the wind. "They were never on our side to begin with." Ethan buried his face in his hands. "I don't know if I can keep carrying this." Isha leaned forward, her pink coat zipped to her chin. "You don't have to carry it alone." They all looked at her. A child, 10 years old, shoulders straight as steel. She reached into her backpack and pulled out her sign, creased, smudged, but still legible. "Believe kids." She held it up like it was a shield. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Michael stood, surprising himself. "She's right." He turned to Ethan. "You think Marines fight alone? You think steel beams stand on their own? Nah, we hold each other up." James tapped his cane against the pavement, a weak sound, but steady. "And if they call us agitators, so be it. Better to agitate than disappear." Ethan lifted his head. He saw their faces, tired, scarred, determined. He felt Rex's warm weight press against his leg, steady as ever. And slowly something hardened in his chest. "Then we don't back down," Ethan said. "Not now. Not ever." The circle tightened, not with arms, but with presence. Against a world ready to dismiss them, they were choosing again to show up. And in that choice, however fragile, they discovered something that fear couldn't touch. It came from an email. Not a journalist this time, not a protester. Just a mid-level employee at Walmart's regional headquarters. She sent it anonymously to several reporters, to advocacy groups, and without knowing it, to Ethan himself. The subject line was plain. "You should see this." Attached was a PDF of an internal training manual. 27 pages. Polished. Corporate language, graphs, bullet points. But in between the sterile phrases lived the ugliest. Truths. Page 11. Young minority males should be monitored at checkout counters. Incidents of theft are higher in this demographic. Verify bags when possible. Page 17. Employees showing resistance to bag checks should be flagged for review. Defiance indicates potential dishonesty. Page 23. Maintain strict order. With visible authority. Customers trust firmness over leniency. It wasn't just Collins. It wasn't just a single manager making a bad call. It was the system codified, printed, distributed. Ethan read the words again and again until the letters blurred. They had trained Collins to humiliate him. They had built humiliation into policy. When the story hit the airwaves, the city erupted. Again. Protesters didn't just chant about Ethan anymore. They chanted about every name that had been stopped, searched, doubted. About fathers buying baby formula, teenagers buying snacks, mothers paying with cash, all branded high risk. James read the manual with shaking hands. So that's what they saw when they looked at me, he muttered. Not James Harris. Just high risk. Rex nudged his leg, as if grounding him back in flesh and bone. Michael's eyes darkened. As he scanned the pages, this is how you train soldiers for war. Identify the enemy, drill suspicion, condition obedience. He let the paper crumple in his fist. Except here, the enemy is their own people. Even Aisha, perched on the curb, understood more than she should have. So, they teach grown-ups to be mean? Her voice was quiet, but her eyes burned. Ethan folded the manual, hands trembling. This wasn't an accident, he said. It wasn't about me. It was about all of us. That night, news vans ringed the Walmart lot. Reporters shouted questions, cameras thrust forward. Ethan, how do you feel? Congressman Miller, will you comment? Is this the end of Walmart's policy? But Ethan didn't step forward. Not yet. He looked at James, at Michael, at Aisha, at Rex. He felt the weight of the manual in his bag. And he realized the fight wasn't about defending himself anymore. It was about pulling the mask off a machine built to grind people down. Inside the store, Colin sat alone in his office, staring at the same manual. For years he had followed every word, believing it was order. Now he saw the cruelty written in black and white. And for the first time, he wondered if obeying had made him guilty too. The city waited. The country watched. Something larger than a protest was stirring now. Not a spark, but a fire. And in its glow, the truth looked uglier and more dangerous than anyone had imagined. The city didn't sleep after the leak. By morning, Walmart stores across Chicago were ringed with protesters. Workers walked out mid-shift, aprons tossed onto the pavement. Parents carried toddlers on their hips, chanting about dignity. College students held up their phones, live streaming every moment. #HighRiskHuman trended worldwide. But the backlash came just as fast. Commentators on late-night TV railed about mob mentality. Politicians warned about threats to commerce. Trolls flooded Ethan's social media with doctored photos, his face pasted on mugshots. Headlines reading, "Thief turned martyr." At school, Ethan found his locker defaced. "Sandwich boy" scrawled in black marker. Someone taped a slice of moldy bread to the door. His classmates laughed. He ripped it down with shaking hands, but the humiliation sank deeper than before. He wondered if fighting back had only made the world crueler. James limped down Michigan Avenue, trying to blend with the crowd, but a security guard shoved him back from a storefront. "Not tonight, old man. We've had enough trouble." The guard's hand lingered too long on his chest, not hard enough to bruise, but firm enough to remind him of his place. James swallowed his anger, but inside, something cracked. Michael went to the VA again, hoping the scandal might change something. Instead, a guard stopped him at the door. "Your name's on a list," he said. "Potential agitator. You'll need clearance." Michael laughed, bitter and hollow. "Agitator," he repeated. "That's what you call a Marine who bled." "For this country?" The guard didn't flinch. The word hung heavier than the medals locked away in a drawer at home. Aisha faced the storm too. Her teacher confiscated her sign, "Believe Kids," and tore it in half. "We don't bring politics into the classroom," she said coldly. Aisha's cheeks burned, but she lifted her chin. "It's not politics," she whispered. "It's the truth." Her classmates giggled, but she refused to look away. That evening, they gathered again in the lot, but the silence between them was heavier than before. Ethan sat on the curb, staring at the cracked asphalt. "Maybe they're right," he said. "Maybe we're just noise. Maybe nothing changes." James shook his head, his voice low and rough. "That's what they want you to think. That's what they've always wanted me to think. 40 years ago, 30 years ago, today. Doesn't matter. The system survives when we give up. Michael's fists clenched. But they've marked us. I'm on a list now. You're a headline. She's... He looked at Aisha, so small, so stubborn. She's a target. Aisha didn't flinch. She sat straighter, her coat zipped to her chin. Then we stay together. That's what scares them. Her words landed like a challenge, heavier than her years. Ethan looked at her, then at James, then at Michael. He felt Rex's steady weight lean against his leg, warm and real. For a moment, the noise of the world fell away. The headlines, the trolls, the scorn, they were still out there. But here, in this circle, there was something the system couldn't erase. Defiance. Ethan lifted his head. His voice was quiet, but certain. If they want us silent, then our voices matter more than ever. No one cheered, no one clapped. But the four of them, five, counting Rick, sat a little taller. And in that fragile silence, the city's storm grew louder, promising that the hardest battles were still ahead. City called it a hearing. A town hall-style event in a high school gymnasium, folding chairs lined in rows, a podium set up under the American flag. The mayor had promised dialogue after the protests grew too loud to ignore. Walmart executives were there. Local police representatives. And front and center Congressman Robert Mueller. The air was thick with fluorescent light and suspicion. Reporters filled the aisles, cameras already rolling. Ordinary citizens sat shoulder to shoulder, some clutching hand-painted signs, others crossing their arms tight. Ethan hadn't wanted to come, but James insisted. They want us invisible, the old man said. So we walk right into their spotlight. When they entered, the room shifted. Eyes followed them, Ethan, James leaning on his cane, Michael in his fraying jacket, Ashia clutching her mother's hand, Rex padding silently at their side. They looked like an accident of fate. They looked like defiance given flesh. The moderator cleared his throat. Tonight, we invite voices from the community to speak. We'll begin with Congressman Miller. Robert stepped to the microphone. His tie was perfect, his voice measured. We face a difficult moment. The leaked documents do not reflect our values. I voted years ago on a bill I believed would strengthen our economy. If that vote has caused harm, I regret it. A murmur swept the crowd. Regret sounded like a lawyer's word, not a father's. Ethan's stomach turned. Next, a Walmart executive took the stand. She wore a blazer sharp enough to cut glass. These documents are outdated, she said. We are committed to fairness. We believe in trust. Her voice was smooth, her smile rehearsed. Incidents like this are unfortunate but isolated. James barked a laugh from the audience. Isolated? You built a whole manual around suspicion. His voice shook, but it carried. Heads turned. The moderator frowned. Double quote, sir. Please wait for your turn. But James pushed himself to his feet, King trembling under his weight. I worked 30 years in this city. Built the steel you walk on. And now I'm high risk because I lost. My home? Because I carry a worn bag? He raised his hand, knuckles gnarled but steady. Look at me. Do I look like a threat? Or do I just look inconvenient? The gym fell quiet. Michael stood next. You call us agitators. You put us on lists. I bled for this country in deserts I can't forget. And now my file says I'm unstable. If I'm unstable, it's because you broke me. And still, I show up. Still I fight. His voice thundered against the cinder block walls. Aisha tugged free from her mother's hand and walked straight to the microphone. She was too small for it, so Michael lifted her up, setting her on the edge of the podium. She unfolded a fresh piece of paper. The words scrawled in pencil. Believe kids. Her voice was thin but fierce. You say this is just about stores, about rules. But it's about us. Kids, workers, people. You teach grown-ups to be mean, and then you tell us we're the problem when we don't smile back. She looked out over the rows of adults. We're not problems. We're people. The silence that followed was heavier than applause. Even the cameras hesitated, as if afraid to break the spell. Ethan rose last. His legs trembled, but his voice was clear. You humiliated me because a sandwich touched the floor, but this isn't just about me. It's about every person you've looked at and decided they weren't worth trust. Well, I'm telling you, we're done asking for it. We'll take it back ourselves. The crowd erupted, some cheering, some shouting, some jeering. The gym vibrated with noise. The mayor banged his gavel, shouting for order. But order had already slipped. The powerless had spoken, and the words couldn't be stuffed back into silence. Robert Miller sat frozen at the table, his son's voice ringing louder than his own carefully measured regrets. For the first time, he realized the story no longer belonged to him. And in the back, Colin stood against the wall, watching with hollow eyes. He had trained for control, lived by rules. But tonight, watching a homeless man, a broken soldier, a child, and a boy he once humiliated seize the microphone, he felt the ground shift. This was no longer a hearing. It was a reckoning. The gym was a pressure cooker. The crowd roared. Storm of voices, cheers, jeers, chants. Reporters shouted questions over the noise. Cameras swung wildly. The moderator banged his gavel until the wood splintered, but no one listened anymore. The mayor leaned into the mic. Order, please. This is a hearing, not what? James barked from the floor. Not truth? His cane struck the hardwood with a sharp crack. He had meant it as punctuation, but the sudden noise startled Rex. The dog sprang to his feet, barking deep and loud, commanding attention like a gunshot without bullets. The crowd stilled for half a heartbeat, the sound vibrating through there. Security moved then. 2 guards pushed forward toward James, hands outstretched. Sir, step down, sit back. I'm not done speaking, James snapped, trying to hold his ground. His cane trembled, his knees buckling under the strain. Ethan surged forward, blocking their path. Don't touch him. His voice cracked, but it carried. Michael moved too, quicker than he had in years, instinct taking over. He placed himself between James and the guards, shoulders squared, chest high. You want to put your hands on someone, you go through me first. The gym erupted again. People rising to their feet, shouts bouncing off cinderblock walls. Then it happened. One of the guards shoved. James stumbled, his cane clattering to the floor. He fell hard on one knee, a pained gasp escaping his throat. Rex lunged, barking furiously, teeth bared, not attacking, just defending, body vibrating with fury. Aisha screamed, small hands clutching her paper sign to her chest. The cameras caught it all. An old man driven to the floor, a veteran standing. Over him, a child screaming, a boy holding his ground, a dog guarding them like a soldier. The room froze in that tableau. For a moment, it felt as though the whole country was watching through those cameras, deciding what it believed about dignity, about worth, about who was truly dangerous. James, breathing ragged, pushed himself back up with Ethan's help. His voice was low but steady. You can knock me down. You've been knocking me down for years, but I'll keep getting back up. And I'm not standing alone anymore. The crowd erupted, not just noise this time, but something deeper, rawer. A chant rose, rolling like thunder. We are here. The guards hesitated, caught between orders and humanity. The mayor shouted again for order, but it was too late. The powerless had claimed the room, and in the middle of the chaos, Congressman Robert Miller sat frozen, watching his son hold up a man the system had discarded. Realizing the cost of his silence had finally come due. This was no longer politics. It was survival. And survival had found its voice. The fallout came fast. By dawn, the video of James being shoved to the floor had traveled farther than the original Walmart clip ever did. News outlets ran it on repeat. An old man on his knees. A boy pulling him up, a veteran standing guard, a child screaming, a dog holding the line. It wasn't just a protest anymore. It was an image, a symbol. Talk shows argued over it. Some called it civil disobedience at its finest. Others called it chaos disguised as courage. But the image refused to be spun away. Even those who wanted to ignore it couldn't look without feeling something: anger, shame, recognition. Walmart released another statement. This one was different. Gone was the smooth language of isolated incidents. The CEO himself appeared. On camera, stiff but rattled. We will suspend our bag check policy effective immediately. An internal investigation is underway. To those who feel targeted, we are listening. It wasn't enough, but it was a crack. At City Hall, the mayor held a press conference. Reform is necessary, she said. We will review police protocols for public protests, and we are opening a committee to address discrimination in corporate practices. Her voice wavered on discrimination, as though the word itself was heavy in her mouth. For James, the change was smaller but sharper. At the soup kitchen, the volunteer who once slammed his tray now handed it over with a quiet, "Morning, sir." It wasn't respect, not fully. But it was no longer contempt. Michael received a call from the VA. His case had been expedited. He didn't know whether to laugh or curse. After months of waiting, one televised shove had moved mountains bureaucracy never would. Guess I had to bleed in front of cameras instead of battlefields, he muttered. But for the first time, there was an appointment circled on his calendar. Aisha walked into school with her chin high. When a boy whispered "radical," she turned and said, clear enough for the whole hallway to hear, "Better radical than silent." The laughter faltered. Even kids who didn't like her stopped to stare. For the first time, she wasn't invisible. And Ethan, he walked down the street to find strangers nodding at him, clapping his shoulder, calling him brave. But he also saw his face plastered on posters, his name twisted online. He wasn't just Ethan anymore. He was a symbol people wanted to own. And symbols don't get to rest. That night, the five of them gathered again in the Walmart lot. Not because they had to, but because it had become their place. The air was cold, but lighter somehow. They're changing things, Ethan said softly. Policies, committees, statements. James shook his head. They're trying. But don't confuse trying with changing. Michael exhaled smoke, watching it curl into the dark. Change doesn't happen in press conferences. It happens right here. He tapped his chest, then pointed to the circle. And right here. Ashisha held up a new sign she'd made. Letters crooked but proud. We are people, Ethan smiled. It wasn't victory, not yet. But it was something. Rex stretched out beside them, tail sweeping the pavement, as if to say, you're not done. But you're not alone. And for the first time since the night of humiliation under fluorescent lights, Ethan felt the ground beneath him steady. The fight wasn't over. Maybe it never would be. But tonight, they weren't just surviving. They were beginning to live. Winter settled over Chicago, the kind of cold that makes every breath visible, every step deliberate. The Walmart lot was almost empty now, just a few carts rattling in the wind. But the circle still gathered, night after night, not always to plan, not always to protest. Sometimes just to be. James had a new coat. A volunteer group had brought him one, thick and lined, not charity but acknowledgement. He still slept rough most nights, but people stopped looking through him. Sometimes they nodded, sometimes they asked his name. He always answered, James, remember that. Michael finally walked into the VA clinic for his appointment. The nurse didn't look at him like a file this time, but like a man. Therapy would be slow, benefits tangled, but for once, the door had opened. He left the building lighter, though the scars were still heavy. Asho taped her signs to her bedroom wall. Believe kids, respect US. We are people. They were crooked, some letters. fading, but to her they were trophies. When her mother tucked her in at night, Denise would touch the papers gently, as if they were sacred. "You're braver than I ever was," she whispered. Isha only smiled, knowing bravery was just another word for telling the truth out loud. Ethan still struggled with the weight of being a symbol. Some days he wanted to rip his name from the headlines to be just a boy again. But other days, when strangers stopped him on the street to say thank you, he felt something shift inside. Not pride exactly, but purpose. His humiliation had been stolen from him, broadcast without his consent. But what he did with it now was his choice. His father, Robert, sat in silence most evenings, watching his son on TV instead of his own speeches. Politics had taught him to measure worth in polls and numbers. Ethan had taught him something else, that dignity isn't negotiated. It's lived. One night, as snow dusted the lot, Ethan arrived to find the others already there. James leaning on his cane, Michael's breath curling in the cold. Asha's coat zipped to her chin. Rex sprawled between them like a watchful shadow. Ethan sat down, the chill seeping through his jeans, and smiled. "Funny," he said. "This lot used to be where I lost everything. Now it feels like where I found something." James nodded. "Sometimes the world takes away your roof so you can see the sky." Michael chuckled low. "Poetic, old man." Asha giggled, hugging Rex's neck. "I like it." The wind cut sharper, but the circle held steady. For a long moment, none of them spoke. They didn't need to. The silence itself was a kind of victory, the silence of people who refused to vanish, who chose to keep showing up. Somewhere beyond the city, the fight would go on. Policies to rewrite, systems to challenge, prejudices too stubborn to die in one winter. But here, under the buzzing lamp and falling snow, they had already won something greater, each other. Ethan looked at their faces, worn but unbroken, and thought, maybe this is how change begins. Not in speeches, not in policies, but in people deciding to stand together, even when the world tells them not to. Rex barked once, the sound sharp and steady, as if agreeing. The circle laughed, their breath rising into the night, dissolving into the sky. And for the first time, Ethan believed not just in survival, but in the possibility of a world that could learn to see. Years later, people still remembered the video. Not the first one, the shaky clip of a boy forced to open his bag, but the second one, the one that lived on posters and in history books. A circle of four and a dog, standing their ground under fluorescent lights, refusing to be erased. Ethan Miller was no longer a sandwich boy. He had finished school, though not quietly. Reporters tried to follow him, activists tried to claim him, critics tried to break him. But through it all, he learned to carry his story instead of letting it carry him. Now he stood in front of classrooms, telling students what dignity meant. Not in theory, but in blood and bone. You can lose everything, he told them, and still keep your voice. As long as you don't give that up, they can't take you. James Harris never moved back into a house, but he didn't need to. A nonprofit hired him to mentor young men coming out of shelters. He told them stories of steel beams and broken knees, of mistakes and survival. They called him Mr. James. He still walked with Rex, older now, slower, but whenever they passed a construction site, James tipped his cane toward the sky. "I helped build that," he would say. And, for once, people believed him. Michael O'Connor kept fighting his shadows, one day at a time. Therapy wasn't a cure, but it was a map. He worked security at a community center, not for the paycheck but for the quiet pride of keeping kids safe in a world that hadn't kept him. Sometimes when the nightmares came, he walked out to the street and lit a cigarette. But now, instead of feeling alone, he felt the weight of others standing beside him, even if only in memory. And Asiya grew up. Her walls were still covered in hand-drawn signs, but by 17, she was making new ones, sharper, bolder, painted in bright colors. She organized walkouts at her school. She spoke at rallies with her voice steady and clear. And when people asked where it started, she smiled and said, with a paper sign and a boy they didn't believe. The Walmart lot had changed. New lights, new pavement, fresh paint. But every so often, someone left a bouquet of flowers by the lamppost or taped a handmade sign to the wall. The workers knew better than to remove them. Some stories belonged to everyone. On a quiet evening, Ethan returned there. Snow drifted down, soft as memory. He sat on the curb, the same spot where everything had begun, and let the silence wrap around him. In the distance, he thought he heard a bark, low, steady, protective. He smiled. The world hadn't fixed itself. It probably never would. But he had learned something that night, and every night after. Change doesn't start perfect. It starts fragile, in circles, in voices, in small acts of courage that refuse to disappear. He closed his eyes, breathed in the cold air, and whispered the words that had carried them all. We are here. See the ones the world ignores. Believe the voices they dismiss. Change begins when we refuse to look away. If this story moved you, join us, subscribe to the channel, and keep the voices alive.